Are we ever going to have a real solution? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. We've got a serious topic to dive into today, but before we do, I need y'all to do me a solid. If you like what you're hearing, if you're digging what I'm saying, if you're picking up what I'm throwing down, or if you just want to see more of this charming face, you know what to do. Hit that like button like it did something to you personally. Share this episode with a friend who needs a reality check. And don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. That way you'll be updated whenever I upload a new episode. Seriously, subscribing to my channel is like having insurance. You don't always think you need it until you do. And by the way, you always need it when it comes to A Fresh Perspective. Also, if you want to take a deeper dive into liberty and everything about liberty, make sure you check out my Substack, which is called Chasing Liberty. You can access that at libertychasers.com. It's like a warm blanket of freedom wrapped around your inbox every single day or week or whenever I publish, which is all the time nowadays. You can access that at libertychasers.com. Become a subscriber and support my work. I really appreciate it. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into this. Now, earlier today, the news broke about yet another school shooting. This one happened at Appalachee High School in Georgia, in Winder, Georgia. And so for those of you who haven't already heard, just a little kind of a synopsis here, there was a shooting that took place at this high school. It left at least 4 people killed and 30 others injured. We don't know all the details yet. The details are still coming in. But here's what we know so far. The police responded to reports of an active shooter around 10:23 in the morning, and they were able to get the situation under control. We don't know how this happened or what took place, but they did arrest a suspect who was reportedly around the age of a student, but it's not quite clear whether this individual actually attended the school or if he was an outsider or what have you. The entire school district went into lockdown. There were several injured individuals who had to be airlifted to local hospitals for treatment. The authorities have not confirmed yet how many of the injuries were from actual gunshots, but we do know that there were ambulances and helicopters that were scrambling to get people to safety. It's heartbreaking. This is one of those situations where, you know, we're not surprised by this stuff anymore, but it's still devastating. You know, my heart goes out to all the victims and their families and everybody who is affected by this. And, you know, this is the kind of story that I hate discussing. I hate writing about this stuff. I hate doing videos on it because they shouldn't be happening in the first place. But unfortunately, there's plenty of evil in the world, but there's always the question that comes up whenever this happens, right? It's like clockwork. What do we do about this? When are we ever going to stop these atrocities? What's going on in American society? That kind of thing. But there's always something else that comes up as well, too. That's what I'll be talking about. You can already see where I'm going, right? Every time something like this happens, the conversation quickly shifts to one topic, gun control. That always happens maybe about 5 minutes after the news breaks about one of these school shootings or another mass shooting. You've got politicians, activists, celebrities. Immediately they start calling for new gun laws, new gun bans, new restrictions on firearms, as if that's actually going to stop these horrible things from happening. You know, it's like every time something like this happens, the gun control crowd comes out in full force, ready to tell us that we just need to pass one more law, 2 more laws, 3 more laws, ban one more type of gun, and poof, we'll have no more school shootings. I hit my microphone. My bad. But here's the thing. We've already had plenty of gun laws passed, and they haven't worked. They're not going to. Gun control is not going to stop this or any other mass shootings. Now, we already know criminals don't care about your gun-free zones. By the way, I believe it's about 97% of all mass shootings happen in gun-free zones. These people don't care about your background checks. They're already planning to commit one of the most serious crimes one can commit, mass murder. Do we really think like a few extra gun laws are going to make them stop and reconsider? No, That's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked. And that's not how it's ever going to work. But here's the reality. I mean, some people don't like hearing this, but gun control does not stop mass shootings. And as a matter of fact, every time something like this happens and people start saying, oh, we need an assault weapons ban, we need this or that, I ask a very simple question, and anti-gunners can't answer it. I've never had a good answer so far. I always ask, okay, what new gun law would you propose that would have actually stopped this shooting? Crickets. Crickets every single time. Because the reality is that these laws don't work. Criminals, by definition, do not follow the law. If somebody's planning to commit a mass murder, they're not going to be deterred if they see a gun-free zone sign. As a matter of fact, that might make them more likely to target an area. If they can't buy a gun legally, they'll get one illegally. We've seen this over and over and over again for decades. You know, look at Chicago, Washington, D.C. These cities have some of the strictest gun control laws in the country, but they're still some of the most violent places in the country. None of these criminals care about the laws. They get their guns on the black market, they steal them, straw purchases. There are a plethora of ways that people can obtain firearms outside of the laws that are already set up. These laws always end up hurting law-abiding citizens more than anybody else. If you pass sweeping gun control measures, guess who gets disarmed? The people who just want to protect themselves and their families and their property. The criminals, yeah, they still got guns. So here's the thing. When we have these gun control laws and we have these conversations, they're even more dangerous, not even just because they work to disarm law-abiding, decent, responsible people, but because they distract us from actually looking at solutions that might actually help, especially when it comes to school shootings. It's a distraction. It's a distraction from other methods we could be employing in these schools that might actually deter or stop a mass shooter or a school shooter. Now, here's the thing. The reason why we see these shootings happening at schools isn't because there's too many guns in the country. Guns have been an American thing since the nation was founded. We've always had tons of guns, yet we haven't always had this problem. What the issue is not the availability of guns, it's the lack of deterrence and defense. These criminals and these psychopaths know that schools are places where they can do the most damage in the shortest amount of time with the least resistance. Why? Because they're largely undefended. They're largely unprotected. They are gun-free zones. Think about it. Where do these people always choose to attack? Like I said, 97% of these things happen in gun-free zones. They happen in schools, malls, movie theaters. These are areas where they know are more likely to face minimal opposition. You know, you don't hear about them running into a police station to do this stuff, right? Very rare, because they're going to get shot before they can do any real damage. They're not going to go to a gun range and try to do a mass shooting, right? Because they're going to be dead before they can get off the first shot in most cases. They go for places where people are unarmed and they're defenseless. And our schools have become prime targets because, by and large, we don't do enough to secure these facilities. So the question is, how do we fix this? How do we make schools less appealing targets for these deranged individuals? Well, instead of, talking about making it harder for responsible people to obtain the means by which they can defend themselves, maybe we could actually employ some security measures that would actually work. As a matter of fact, a lot of states are already doing this. I know Texas is one of them. After the Uvalde shooting, they started implementing security measures or enhanced security measures in schools. We've talked about armed security officers. They don't necessarily have to be police officers, but some type of armed personnel whose only job is to protect the children if somebody does want to get froggy or if somebody does get violent. And the thing is, we already use security guards in pretty much every other facility, but for some reason, people are against using it in schools. If it's a gun-free zone, then that makes it easier for a mass shooter. If there's armed security, it's not a gun-free zone. If there's somebody who's planning to do harm at one of these schools, they're going to know that they're going to be met with immediate resistance, and they won't be able to get the body count that they want, because that's why most of these people do these things. They want to kill as many people as possible before killing themselves, getting killed, or being taken into custody. I'm not saying that you have to have a full military garrison at every school, but if you have some armed security officers that are visible, that can act as a deterrent. There's already been cases where this has actually happened. There have already been threats stopped just because they were present. They didn't even have to fire their guns. Um, Another measure would be to control who can get into schools in the first place. There are a lot of schools out there that still have a lot of different types of multiple entrances that aren't always monitored. They can be open from the outside. It's like leaving your front door wide open and wondering why somebody was able to stroll on in and steal your television set or your PlayStation or whatever. I mean, doing things like limiting the number of entrances, maybe even having metal detectors like a lot of schools have, especially in the inner city, that prevents somebody, a would-be gunman, from bringing their firearm into the school to commit mass murder. There are a lot of other measures as well, too. Now, here's one that's more controversial. There's armed teachers who are being armed and trained and armed, whatever order you want to put that in. There are a lot of states that have actually allowed for this. Now, they don't require the teachers to be armed, but if a teacher does want to be armed in the classroom, they have to go through a set of training. They have to, get certified or whatever, and then they'll be able to be armed. Now, people, they kind of get nervous about that. I understand why, but at the same time, if a mass shooter does decide to come in, would you rather those teachers be armed or unarmed? Would you rather them be trained, or would you rather them being defenseless? A lot of these teachers that have died in these mass shootings have done so because they were heroic. But it's sad because they will shield the children with their bodies. I would rather them shield the children with their own gun to fire back at the bad guy. To me, it makes a lot more sense. So one of the arguments against this is that, these measures are too extreme, or we shouldn't have to go this far to protect our kids. And you're absolutely right. We shouldn't have to. But the sad reality is that we do. We live in a world where these threats exist. And until we get to the root issue of these problems and, deal with the mental health aspect of it and the other factors that contribute to these tragedies, we can't just wait for politicians to pass some magic law that'll make all the bad people disappear and not want to use guns to hurt people. Here's the thing. We already use these measures in every other area. We use them in courthouses, city halls, government buildings, even private facilities have security guards, metal detectors. There are plenty of those. If you go to a sports ball event, you might have to go through a metal detector. You might have to get patted down. They have security. Why should the government buildings, or even stadiums or other facilities, why should they have more protection than our kids, than kids in schools? It doesn't make sense. So maybe instead of trying to find ways to get around the Second Amendment or to play on people's emotions to disarm them or to make it harder for them to be able to defend themselves, we should be looking at actual solutions that will protect school children. But unfortunately, there are far too many people who want to use these things for a political agenda. It's not really about protecting the children, at least not for the activist class and the chattering class. I know well-meaning people who support these laws think that this is actually going to work. That's part of the con job. Gun control laws, 99.9% of them are basically feel-good laws, feel-good legislation. They pass it, it makes you feel good because it makes it sound like the government is actually doing something to solve the problem, when in reality, they're not actually doing anything. They're pursuing another agenda, which is stripping you of your gun rights in order to protect, to have legislation that won't protect anybody except for people who might break the law and get guns anyway. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the problem is a lot of people don't really think more deeply about these issues, and they just go with it. Oh yeah, we need more gun control laws. Well, we've already had a bunch of them. They don't stop these things. So maybe we should start thinking about actual solutions. I listed off some here as far as making schools more harder targets, but there are probably other areas where we can prevent this as well. Also, we need to be having more conversations about what leads people to commit these acts in the first place. That's another thing that the anti-gunner lobby doesn't really want to focus on, because again, their objective isn't to prevent these things from happening. Their objective is to violate your gun rights, to make for a less armed society. That way you're more dependent on the government if somebody does try to victimize you, which we already know how that tends to turn out. I could do a whole other video on that. But the reality is that relying only on the government to save you is a losing strategy. People lose their lives because of it. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I wanted to address what happened earlier today. Let me know what you guys think. I want to hear your thoughts on this. But until next time, thank you for joining A Fresh Perspective. Be sure to subscribe and like and share this, all that good stuff. And until next time, stay free, stay principled, and most importantly, stay ungovernable.